Hello and welcome to the Cameo Show. I'm your host, Cameo. We are joined by my husband and co-host, Greg Braun. And today we have a remarkable guest who has embarked on a journey that's both inspirational and deeply moving. She's the author of the newly released book, My Father's List: How Living My Dad's Dreams Set Me Free. Her name is Laura Carney, and her story is one of resilience, courage, and honoring the memory of a loved one in such a brave, extraordinary way. So, Laura, thank you so much for being here with us and sharing your story. I'm so excited to have you here.
Oh, thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
We connected before you maybe even started writing the book, or were just starting to write your book as a part of a networking group many years ago. And that's how I started following you and following your journey. And so to see this come to fruition is really, really cool. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And so I started reading it. I haven't gotten all the way through, so I'm so excited to be chatting with you directly. I feel like I'm getting a behind the scenes personal storytelling session that we can share with our listeners. So my understanding and what I've gotten through so far is that your father was killed in a car accident, and that you came across his bucket list and completed it in his honor. And that was a lot of adventuring. 54, I think I saw in 6 years. And so I would love to dig into some of those and maybe start at the beginning with how you came across this list and how you were even inspired or decided to begin taking on the list yourself, if you don't mind starting there.
Sure. It's funny. I really debated in the prologue of the book whether I should write I finished it or I decided to finish it because it's like I don't want to give it away that I actually did it.
Sure.
But it's like even though I did write, I decided to finish it, and I mean, from the looking at the back of the book that I finished it. Um, I have found that readers still tell me sometimes, like, oh, I was really rooting for you. I didn't know if you were going to do it.
Yeah.
Like as they
Right.
get through the last few chapters, because they feel like they're on the mission with me. Um, but so my father died when I was 25 years old. I had actually just moved to New York for a magazine internship, and it was my first time living away from home, except for college. And it was in a car crash with a 17-year-old who was making a phone call at a red light. And she didn't see the red light after and just went right through it while on the phone. And when it happened, at first I thought it was a drunk driver,
Mhm.
I think as you would. And I remember my brother was the one who called me and he said, no, it was in the middle of the afternoon. And it was sort of like I was living in this very weird liminal space for a couple of weeks there. And then that sort of extended into a few months. And thank goodness my now husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, we had made this plan for him to move across the country to New York with me. Like we had actually met online that summer. So
Oh,
he had
wow.
come and visited me 3 times, and then he met my dad once, and then my dad died 5 days later.
Oh my
So
gosh.
we had this road trip planned, and it was going to be this incredibly like adventurous, romantic trip across the country. And I was there in body, but I wasn't really there, you
Sure.
know, like now my life had taken a very different turn. And I was only 25 and he was only 29, and the two of us were going to have to navigate that. I had actually just gone through, I guess it was about 7 years of different therapists, as I was diagnosed with depression as a teenager. And that culminated in a hospital stay where they had to take me off of just about every medication they had put me on. I had been put on like 9 different medications at once at one point. And because of that, I was really avoidant of therapy and of therapists in general. So while I was in a situation where I definitely could have sought some kind of support for my dealing with this tragedy, I refused to do it
Sure.
because I thought, well, they're going to label me again. Like I was this very like rebellious kid. So I didn't do that. And instead I just sort of focused on work. I focused on trying to have a life that was normal. And part of me was almost angry with my dad sometimes, even though it wasn't his fault that this had happened to him. I definitely had this feeling of like, okay, you guys got divorced when I was 6, and you moved out, and I felt abandoned then. And now here I am at 25, finally starting my life, and it's happening again.
Mhm.
So even though it totally wasn't his fault, I really did feel like I don't want to deal with this. That was the feeling I had. So I spent, I guess, about the next 10 years of my life just very focused on work, on climbing the ladder, so to speak, in New York. And by the time my husband proposed marriage, the way I like to say it is my life looked really great on paper, but there was something like very unresolved still inside of me. I was still carrying around this resentment, and almost like the best way I can describe it is a lot of my life for that decade had just been me trying to survive, like me trying to live a life despite this thing that had happened. Like, I'm going to live a good life anyway. And that doesn't really work because, it's almost like the whole good vibes only movement that people have. It's like, but you can't just avoid like the feelings that you need to process that are very, at that point, were very deeply buried inside of me. So there was just something about my husband's proposal, which he did at Christmas. And so when I was a little kid, my dad used to always let me hang the star on the tree. And he would save it for me every time. And my husband knew that that was something that was really special to me. And when we first moved in together, we actually went out and got Christmas ornaments. And I found a star that looked identical to the one that I had. So the way he proposed was he hid the ring underneath of the star.
Oh.
So that when I put it on, it was funny because the star was like way too big for our little rinky dink, like artificial tree. So it would always be like a Charlie Brown tree, like the star would kind of flap over. And when he had the ring there for the first time, the star stayed. And I was so excited about the fact that the star stayed on. Like it wasn't computing like, and he's like, maybe there's something under it. The whole reason it actually stayed on was because the ring was there. And I love telling that story because I feel like it's such a great metaphor for our relationship. Because, obviously I said yes. And afterward, we recognized, I'm still carrying this anger from this thing that happened. And I need to face it. I don't want to carry this into my marriage too. And I need to do something about it. And so I became an activist. And that was almost like a happy accident because I worked for Good Housekeeping by then as a copy editor. And one day an article came across my desk and it was about distracted driving. And I had never really connected that with my dad's death. I had always thought of it as like, oh God, maybe he just was unlucky in life. And it was like this fluke thing that happened to him. But then when I saw that this man's daughter had died because of someone on their phone, and I remembered the headline of the article, which said teen cited for talking on cell phone. I realized, oh, this happened to my family too. Maybe I should help this man. And, as a journalist, you're not really supposed to do that. You're not supposed to like call anyone in articles, but something in me knew I needed to. Sure. So I did. And I waited a couple of days actually, because I was so afraid, because I think I just sort of knew like this is going to change my life when I do this. And then I did. And I went and I talked with him in a high school. And I think that was really the beginning for me of finally being public with this thing that had happened. And I mean, I didn't even talk about it at work. Like I didn't talk about it with anybody. Sure. So to be in front of people discussing this traumatic thing that had happened in my life, it was like I was accepting it, like beginning to accept it a little bit and saying this was real, this happened to me. And then Joel, that's the name of the man who was in the article, his daughter was a 21-year-old journalism student when she was killed. And he was the first person who actually said to me, you're a journalist, like you're a writer, you're at a national level. You should be writing about this. Like you're in a space where it would be published probably. I mean, I was a copy editor, so I wasn't sure if it would, but the most amazing things started happening, which was every time I would pitch a story about this or about distracted driving, anything connected to my dad's death, people would say yes. Like Runner's World would say yes. The Washington Post would say yes. And I was sitting there like, this is crazy. Like There's something to this. Yeah. Yeah. Like I've been trying to be a published writer for 10 years. And I just keep taking these jobs as a copy editor because for some reason my pitches don't land. And I'm not as interested in writing about things as I was when I was in college. Like I've almost lost that passion for it. And the reason I had lost the passion for it, I mean, I didn't actually lose the passion for it. What had happened was I had the biggest story of my life that I was supposed to tell, but I was too afraid to tell it.
Mhm.
So until I told that story, I wasn't going to be able to move forward and, write other things. So
Sure.
basically, now that people are finally publishing things I have to say, I'm finally starting to recognize, like, oh, this is the story I'm supposed to be telling. But I didn't know, I couldn't wrap my head around, like, how can I tell this story so that people will actually listen?
Right.
I mean, beyond the editors of these publications, because to me, it was like, it's such a bummer. Like, this is such
Sure.
a sad thing. And, when I do these talks in high schools, I'm happy that I'm making an impact, and I'm happy that they're great for these kids to be learning. But it seems to me there's more to my dad's story than that day when he died,
Right.
and 6 months after I got married, which, when I did get married, I felt a little bit better about the fact that I had become an activist. Like, I felt a little bit better about what had happened, because I felt like, oh, at least I'm taking some action here. Like, another woman won't have to feel this way walking down the aisle on her wedding day, because I've done something to try to help prevent that. So
Yes.
that felt good, and it felt a little bit less sad to me, but I was still crying while walking down the aisle because I missed my dad.
Sure.
So 6 months later, that was when my brother was about to get married too, and he was moving into his first house, and that's when he found my dad's bucket list. And my husband and I were up visiting him, and they were actually planning on framing it and giving it to me as a gift for being in their bridal party, but they were just so excited about it that they needed to show it to me, like, on that visit. And there was something about the list. My dad had written at the top of it things I would like to do in my lifetime. I always love to mention that he underlined "would like to,"
Ah,
because it was like, he, in case anyone ever found this thing, like, don't confuse this with a to-do list.
I didn't commit
These
to
are
this fully, but I would like to, kind
these
of
are
a
just
vibe. Yeah.
experiences I want to have, like, they're
Yes.
not obligations. And
Yes.
to find out he wrote it when he was 29 years old, and this wasn't a man who was 45 and thinking about his impending, death. It was a man who was 29, and he was anticipating how wonderful he wanted his life to be.
Ambitious and a big dream list, really.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
wasn't like, the term bucket list didn't exist yet, so I
Sure.
don't think he would have even been thinking about his death. I think he was just thinking about, he was a big believer in like, law of attraction and intentional living. And I think he just felt, if I write down the things I want to do, then this brings it one step closer to actually happening. And
Yes.
he read a lot of books about that, which I didn't even know until recently. Like, I had no idea. He loved Napoleon Hill, and he loved these, like, big thinkers. So yeah, so that's what it was. And to see that, it just, like, it just lit me up, because I remembered who he was as a person, and I remembered the kind of, just the big dreamer that he was, and that he wouldn't have ever been bogged down by some of the stuff I was getting bogged down by at that point. Because, like, after my wedding, I went into this, like, existential depression of, oh, what am I supposed to do now? Like, everyone's telling me, now you guys need to buy a house, now you have to have kids, now you have to do this, now you have to do that. And I was thinking, God, at least I got the wedding done. Like, isn't that
Yeah. Let
enough,
me
people?
enjoy this moment. Right.
But I was beginning to recognize, like, okay, as a woman of a certain age, people are looking at me and thinking, like, well, why isn't she doing this? Is she normal? Like I got very invested in that. And something felt off to me about it, because here I was, like, this person who had lived sort of a unique life up to that point. Like, I made myself move to New York when I was 25. I got a job in magazines. My dad had died in this really strange, like, traumatic way. My husband and we waited 10 years before he proposed. Like, I sort of feel like nothing about my life has been normal. So why all of a sudden do I feel this pressure to be normal, like, to
Right.
fit in? And I just remembered who my dad was, and how he never cared about what people thought. And he was such a unique person. So to find the list exactly when I did, and make the choice to embark on it, it wasn't a situation where I'm like this dutiful daughter who always was like a daddy's girl. Like that wasn't what it was at all. I actually thought I was much more like my mom. It was more, I need to find a way to do something about distracted driving. I need to find a way that's positive to do that. And I need to honor this person who I feel was really influential in my life, but it's almost like he just vanished one day. And then we
Right.
didn't really talk about him again. So
Yeah.
that's what it was about for me. But then there was also this other element of he was very creative and he was a free spirit. And if I do this, this could be my doom. Like this could like be this could really send my life off track and be awful for me because I
Sure.
was so afraid of how much of an adventurous person he was. I had no idea that what was actually going to happen was these list items, a lot of them were not going to be as challenging as I thought. There would be parts of me that would come to the surface that I didn't know were there. I would remember lessons he had given me as a kid that were actually almost like they had trained me to do the different things. And I was actually almost, almost like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. Like I had it in me the whole time, but
Yeah.
I was repressing it because I was so afraid of being my authentic self.
Right. That gives me chills up and down everywhere. It's so beautiful that you've taken this tragedy and this moment of grief and confusion that then stimulates often this anger response that you were describing in us, especially when
Yeah.
we don't address the feelings that we have and we do try to just push them to the side and continue on, as it sounds like you did for quite some time.
Yep.
Um, it's so beautiful that you were able to take this situation and make it a mission and make it something where you became an activist for this distracted driving, to bring it to the surface and say, hey, this is real, and this isn't just like, oh, put your phone down, don't text and drive. This is like something that impacts and changes the trajectory of people's lives in a split second. Pay attention. And that the fact that you were able to do that, I think, is so selfless and also so brave. And then the fact that, we're just getting to the list and we haven't even got into all of the adventuring, but like the fact that you were able to recognize that about yourself in the way that you described, of saying, these are things that I had in me all along. These are things that in fact he may have prepared me for and taught me, that now I have confidence and the ability to face them. Would it be accurate to say maybe because they weren't necessarily your goals at the time? They were
Yeah, I
his.
mean, some of them were,
Yeah.
write and have a few novels published. I wanted to write a book. The
Yeah.
tennis list item, it was beat a number one seed in a tennis tournament. I don't know that I wanted to do that, but I did like tennis. There's
Sure.
once in a while there'd be things that I enjoyed and wanted to do myself.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm through the book enough to have been through a few of the adventures with you. The first one, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, is the one of running 10 miles straight. Like you were already running, you just
Yeah.
maybe hadn't completed all together. So this was a situation where you took this list item and really made it an opportunity to step up for yourself in a way that maybe you hadn't been believing in fully at that point in yourself to do those things. I don't
Well,
want to paraphrase that incorrectly, but
no, that's right. I mean, but isn't it funny that I didn't become a runner until I was 35? And I remember I would go to the gym in my building at work and I just had this distinct feeling that my dad was proud of me because I was running and I couldn't place why. And this, like I said, this was like before we found the list.
yeah,
And I had never considered myself an athlete, not really. I played basketball up until high school. I played tennis, but then I was like a marching band nerd. Like I wasn't like someone, I was an academic. I didn't consider and certainly not in my 20s. And I guess I was getting to an age at 35 where my peers were sort of like, we don't really want to do happy hour. We want to go work out, like we want to
yeah,
do things
sure.
that are good for us. And I really only started running just to make friends at my new job. Because these people were like running marathons, but that's another one of those examples of how life was sort of preparing me for this adventure before I even knew what it was. And
Right.
I think that happens a lot. I think, because people are always asking me, How did you know the list was your purpose? Or like, how does a person figure out what they're here for, like what their purpose is? And one of the things I like to tell people is that you're already preparing for the moment when it finds you. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's happening to you every day. And you can make choices where basically you're just committing to do things that you love to do, that you feel called to do, but they seem impractical,
Mm-hmm.
just whatever it is that is for you, or things where you're just strengthening yourself and improving yourself. And you don't really know why you're committing so much time to this self-improvement thing. But the thing that happens is that every time you keep a commitment to yourself with that stuff, you're actually making yourself more prepared for that day when you find your list. For the, like, I know now that when that list showed up, I was ready. Like, I had been running for a couple of years. The first list item ended up being run 10 miles straight for me because I had just run the New York Marathon the year before. So running 10 miles, like just with no walking at all as part of the LA Marathon made sense. Like I had already signed up for the LA Marathon
Yeah.
when we found the list. I'm like, oh yeah, I can do this. So to be in a place where I could have confidence about so many of those items because I had already become an endurance athlete. Like, I don't think there's anything about that was a coincidence.
Yeah. I love that so much too. We talk a lot about that if we're paying attention, often there are signs, there are serendipitous moments, there are things that you've been preparing for to be ready. You just aren't quite sure what it is. And then one day it all makes sense. It all connects. There's this book called Big Magic.
Oh yeah.
And have you read that one? It's
My
you know,
husband has, he quotes from it all the time.
it's so great. I read it very quickly. It just is so warm and so relatable in that way of if you're paying attention to the universe and the signs, it's all right in front of you. Just the idea being that if we're open, there's got to be this openness to being ready to accept whatever is there for us. And so again, you've taken a situation that was difficult. I mean, difficult is like an understatement. I can't even imagine how I would feel or what that might feel like. But you've taken this situation and found a way to make it beautiful, to make it positive, to make it have purpose, and make your father's life have purpose after he already was, alive and fulfilling his own purpose. Like you've taken that to the next level in a way that has impacted so many people. I'm curious, when you found the list, how did you decide that you wanted to do that? Like some of the list items you were just describing about the running, like this makes sense and this is all in alignment, and some of them aren't that crazy, but did you decide right then, like, I'm going to do all of them? I'm doing this. Yeah. It wasn't well, I'll do a few and then maybe I'll complete some of the other ones. It was like, I'm completing this whole thing all right out,
Yeah,
right
I
out of
mean,
the gate.
there was no logic applied. There was no like, let me think about it. It was like a light bulb moment, similar to, when I got my internship in New York, I knew it was only going to be $10 a day. There was no college credit because I'd already finished college at that point. And I had, I don't know, maybe $1,000 in my bank account. And it was a crazy decision to say, yes, this is what I'm doing. But it was like, I knew this was supposed to be my life.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going to do that. When I met my husband, we met online and I saw his picture and I saw his eyes for the first time. And it was like, this is like, I remember when he called me and I heard him say hello. It was like, I know this voice. I know these eyes. This is going to be my life, is this
Mm-hmm.
person. And when he proposed, it was the same thing. It was like, who knows what the future holds for us? And yet I know it's going to be with you.
Yeah.
And the list was like that. It was like, this is a moment that's really important in my life. And I just want to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Like this. And also this was answering so many problems in a way, because I felt like my dad's spirit had left it right there at that moment in time on purpose for me to find it right then. Because I think I might have glanced at it when I was 25 by accident.
Okay.
I think that was what it was that I saw. 'Cause I do remember seeing Talk with the President written down somewhere on something and
Yeah. But
and
just more
being,
of like seeing it and moving on, like not giving it too
well,
much
yeah, I
energy.
could have sat there and realized what it was and read the whole thing, because I think I remember being in my mom's basement and like seeing that and thinking, like, oh my God, how embarrassing. You
Ugh,
know, like what was wrong with him that this is what he wanted to do, you know, like how about, you know, like other practical concerns in his life that he could have been thinking about instead of this. Like I'm sure that I don't know that that's what it was, but it was something he made lots of lists, so it could have been a different one.
sure.
But that would have been my attitude then. But by the time I was 38, which is how old I was when my brother gave it to me, I had lived enough life to know that you just, you know, you can't be embarrassed about the things that you want to do, you know, like you have to just go for it. And I think I was getting to a place in my life where people are like, you know, like I don't care what people think anymore.
Oh, right. All that pressure of the shoulds that you were referencing, like, well, you're married now, so you should do this next and you should do that next. And it's like, you don't get to dictate what I should be doing. Like, I
Right.
appreciate your concern and I know that this is kind of the normal trajectory, but that's not how I'm choosing to live my life. And so, you know, I think that then there's that courage that comes up when you're like, you said rebellious. I'm going to kind of rebel against the norm and I'm going to live life the way that I want to. And then being inspired by that list to draw from that energy from your dad is pretty amazing.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I don't think I even knew that I was doing that though. I just knew that I couldn't fit where I was supposed to fit. Like
sure.
I couldn't be what I didn't have this strong desire to settle down, quote unquote, that everybody kept telling me I was supposed to be. Like this is
Mhm.
the natural thing that happens to you after you get married. Like then
Yep.
that's what you want to do. And I just kept thinking like what's wrong with me?
Oh
Like I
yeah.
just it was a desperation of I don't fit and I'm still kind of obsessed about this thing that happened to my family that feels unresolved. Like
Hmm.
that's just like where I was. And so I really think when I didn't even understand yet, like this list is going to lead me down a path where I'm being my authentic self because I didn't know what that was yet.
Yeah.
I just knew that I needed to do something that would honor him.
Hmm.
And I think there was something about making that choice to just that word, right? Like just to honor someone.
Mm.
That was the really unusual thing that I was doing. Like no matter what it was, and no matter how long it was going to take and how complicated it might be. Um, like it's sort of like how often do we do that? Right? Like how often are we making choices in our lives where it's completely guided by honoring someone,
Right.
whether that's your father who has passed away or it's yourself.
Right.
And I think there's just something about that word that when that's now your driving force, you're going to approach your life a little bit differently. You're
Hmm.
going to value it in a different way. It's going to stop being this thing where it's like, and I don't know that this is everybody's experience, but my experience at that stage in my life was I was trying to survive a variety of things that had been somewhat traumatic for me in my 20s, and I survived them by hiding them
Yeah.
and by focusing on how I was perceived by other people or by compensating for them. And there's nothing about living like that is honoring who I am.
Right. Absolutely.
You know what
But
I mean?
I do. And I feel like it's so relatable because I feel like, regardless of the circumstance, I feel like so many people find themselves there, not
Mhm.
sure how to honor themselves because they're bogged down by all of the things that they should be doing or all of the surviving that they need to do and all of the choices that they need to make just to do that. That you wake up one day and you go, well, wait a second, who am I? And I, I realize now that I've been pushing this to the side and not dealing with it, and it's inhibited my ability to live my life to its fullest potential because it's formed and shaped every decision that I've made from that moment forward. So I think it's so relatable, and what you said completely makes sense. You've you're at this point now at this stage at 38 where you're like, I'm ready to embrace who I am, and I don't know what that means, and I'm not sure what that looks like, but I feel like what you're saying is you found this list and it gave you a little bit of guidance, even though it wasn't necessarily meant to. It just kind of, it was inherent knowing, is what I hear you say, like with your husband when you met online
Yep.
and with moving to New York. It was like, I just know. I don't know what the result will be and I don't really care. I just know that this is something that I need to do.
Yeah,
So
intuition. I mean, our intuition is a powerful guide.
Yep. And back to that paying attention. If you're paying attention to what's being presented to you in a way that can enrich your life and enrich who you are as a person, it's all right there. You've been preparing for it the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, I read one of the books I read when I was really soon after my father died, which in that time period I became weirdly fixated on astrology. So
Sure.
I did a lot of that. And I think it was because it was like totally complex and probably didn't mean anything. So it was like a great way to get my mind off of what was happening. But besides that, I also read some really good books. And one of the books I read in that time was The Alchemist. And, you know, what they say in The Alchemist is when you go after your heart's desire, all the universe supports you. And then they talk about I'm probably going to brutalize his name, but Paulo Coelho, the author, like he talks about looking for omens, you know, and how they're always all around you. So I think that, and also there's something about the fact that I chose to stay in New York. You know, I could have gone back to Delaware and been like, okay, well, this was fun, but now I need to go live my real life. And instead, I had met this man who was like, no, you can't do that. Like, you moved here for your dream, and your dad would not want you to give up on your dreams. You have to stay here. So that helped a lot too, because I was choosing to move forward, even though it had now become profoundly more difficult for me. So I think just that one choice ended up making a huge difference in my life, because I was having agency, even though I felt like I was now a victim of something. And I don't think I even really got it until maybe 6 or 7 months in to doing the list, that there were signs showing up and that there was some kind of divine intervention happening, because one of the list items was talk with the president. And we ended up doing that with Jimmy Carter, because I think I was doing an interview on Inside Edition, and someone emailed me and they said, you know, he teaches Sunday school every Sunday of the year still, if any president will do. And then I realized, oh, he was president in 1978 when my dad wrote the list. So that's sort of perfect.
Yeah, that like serendipitous divine intervention, you call it. Like,
Yeah.
it's like the universe showed up and said, here's the right president, or maybe right isn't the right word, but here's the president that's most fitting for this moment.
Right. And that started happening with all of the list items. Like, I would go into each one thinking I knew what it was about and here's what it's going to be. And then it would end up being about something else completely. Like, you know, Run 10 Miles Straight, the first one I did, I thought that was going to be about, you know, my athletic prowess or something, or like, oh, look, she could do it. And what it actually was about was teamwork, because my friend, who had never been a runner before, agreed to run that marathon with me, and we did it relay style. And I got to watch her develop into a runner over like this beautiful 3-month period, and watch her dazzle herself and do things she never thought she could do before. And to have that feeling of like, oh, was I part of this? That's really cool. Like, that ended up being what that was about, because that's what I needed at that time. I needed this example of, this is what it looks like when you let somebody help you, you know. And then with the president one, we went down there with almost no guarantee that I was going to be able to check that off and talk with him. I had a friend who knew someone who could ensure that we would get a seat in the church, because sometimes he would have like hundreds, like 500 people, and you'd have to go and sit in a separate room and watch on like a big screen TV or something. And I was like, no, that can't happen, because I have to actually be in his proximity. So I got someone to guarantee that, but nothing that ensured that I was going to have a conversation with him. And we got down there, and this had been like, so we were in Georgia, and that was like the one place of everything on the list that I had evidence that my dad had actually been there, because my mom took him there to show him her grad school, because she went to University of Georgia to get her master's. So I had these incredible pictures of the two of them standing on top of Stone Mountain, and my dad was like sticking his fist out, like all triumphantly. So I was really trying to persuade my husband, like, we have to climb this, you know, like we have to recreate the pictures. And poor Steven had been awake since like 5 o'clock that morning. He was really tired and really didn't want to do it. But then I ended up convincing him. And because he did that with me, we ended up at the hotel at like 11 o'clock at night. And it was just at the exact moment we were checking in, at the exact moment that Jimmy Carter's biographer was checking in. And we got into a conversation with him. And I had been binging like everything Jimmy Carter for about 2 weeks at that point. So I knew enough that I could talk about him like somewhat intelligently with this man who like it had been his hero since he was 12 years old. So we ended up befriending him. We talked to him for like 2 hours in the park, just in the parking lot, like in front of our cars. And then the rest of the weekend was just almost like serendipitous, because then Art showed up downtown the next day at the same time we did. He was asking me all these questions, like if he could sign anything for you, what would it be? And don't you think he knows you're here already? And I'm like, who is this guy? So by the time we got to the church, and then Jimmy Carter was sitting right in front of us, and then I got to go up, and I had prepared in my head a couple of sentences I was going to say. I felt better knowing that we had met this man, because I mean, we saw him like before the lesson even started. We saw him through the crack of the door back there talking to the president. Like, okay, this guy wasn't just like messing with us. Like he
He's for
really
real.
is. He's
Yeah,
really
he's
friends with
legit.
him.
Yeah.
And um to get to have those few sentences with him and have it also be his dream. This is a person who's helping me to do this, because he's like, I was once in your shoes. It was so meaningful. And then, even the lesson itself, I was in a position at that point in time where I had just gotten an agent for turning this into a book. Like, it was very early, but I already had one. And I was really conflicted about, this is my family, like, this is personal. Is this okay for me to be doing this? And, I don't want to be someone who's like revealing things about my family and my parents' divorce or anything else. I knew my dad didn't care, because, he had lived his life. And I really believed at that point that he was helping me and guiding me. But I mean, there were living people who were going to be in this.
Right.
And during that Sunday school lesson, Jimmy Carter was basically, and he was like 93 doing this, by the way. But he was telling us that when you're born, you have a duty to shape your life. And I'd never heard anyone describe it that way before. Like, this is your responsibility. Like, you've been given life. So you need to decide what you're going to do with it. What kind of person are you going to be? Are you going to be a person who holds grudges? Or are you going to be a person who forgives? Are you going to be a person who resents? Or are you going to be a person who shows compassion to people? And then he started saying how, as you move through your life, it could feel daunting, but you don't have to be afraid, because you have someone helping you all the time. And he said, and it's not your parents, even though they might like to tell you how to live, and you can't tell your parents how to live either, and it's not your spouse, and you can't control what your spouse's life is going to be either. And he said, basically, like, that one influence is God, and God is with you all the time. And he knows everything, and he can do anything. So if you're going to have a partner, like, what better partner could there be than this force that created you, that loves you, that basically can help make anything happen. And I hadn't been like very religious up to that point, but there was just there was something so spiritually profound to me about that idea, that I'm not here alone. Like I was created with, like, by love and with love, and I'm meant to also live my life that way. And I have guidance. I have, almost like I have free will. So I'm making my own choices, but there's also a little bit of destiny involved. And I have help. So I might think, okay, running 10 miles means this, but it actually is a decision I have to make, so I can put myself in the right place at the right time, so that God can teach me something.
Sure.
Because that was what I actually needed. I just had to be willing to cooperate.
Right. And, you don't have to be religious to have that spiritual connection. It doesn't have to be one God isn't the same, and we keep referencing the universe or source, or, just some higher power that's with you, whatever that means to whoever is listening or involved in the conversation. I think just the idea that if you're open to this, it makes those decisions that you were talking about how do I present this without exposing my family members or feeling, any type of guilt or trauma around that. It gives you that guidance that you just back to that inherent knowing. It's like this higher power that's saying, no, this is your purpose. Like you get to decide. Absolutely. You get to take action, but you also have support. And you also have the idea that there will be lessons along the way that confirm that and that make you feel stronger in your conviction about what you're doing and the message and the delivery and the approach, which I think is just so amazing. It's when we're closed off that it gets tricky, right? Because Greg and I have been talking about this a lot recently. Like, we're go-getters. We like to, you know, do a lot of different things that are adventurous and courageous and big dreamers. But I also have this little bit inside of me that likes to try to control all of that. So not necessarily like focus on the finish line, enjoy the process, but also like kind of control it as it goes along. And sometimes that gets me in trouble. If I just relax and allow things, often they present themselves in a way that's so much better and so much greater for me. And maybe that's the lesson for me in that moment, is like, hey, let go, like just relax and let things happen and pay attention and everything will be beautiful. Sounds like that, you know, kind of calmed that fear or that concern that maybe you were having about talking about your family or talking about your personal life, even in that way too. So,
Yeah. Well, what it was I started to develop a trust in
mhm,
myself as a writer. And, and my husband would be saying that too, right? Like he would be like, no, you know who you are. He'd be like, you have more integrity than anyone I've ever met. Like, you have a big heart. You're not going to hurt anybody. Like you're going to do the right thing. So why can't you see that in yourself? And
yeah,
I don't think society necessarily conditions us to trust ourselves. I think instead it's more like you need to be this, that, or the other thing to even be considered acceptable as a
sure.
person or normal. And
Mhm.
it's like, why are we going for ordinary all the time? We could be going for extraordinary. Like we could
Ooh,
just be surrendering into the wonderful beings we are. And each one of us was built the way that we were for a reason. And it's not so that we could use our gifts to try to show up other people. It's so that we could use them to help other people.
Yes.
And
That
I just,
intentionality behind your message, behind your mission, behind everything that you were writing that could be scary to talk about because it's personal. The intentionality wasn't to hurt anyone, it was to help people. It was to share what you had experienced. I think that's I feel like people are afraid to be vulnerable in that way. And if you can break out outside of that, as you're referencing, and as your husband supported you to do and said, you have so much integrity, you have to do this, it frees you. It's so freeing in a way that you just maybe wouldn't expect.
yeah, I mean, Carolyn Mace is a big influence for me. And she always says that. She always says the first step is trusting yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you can trust yourself, then now you're moving into a place where you can trust other people. And I needed to do that in order to get this list done. I needed to be in a space where I could trust other people and allow, I always say 54 people. I know it was much more than that because I think my acknowledgments in my book have like 600 people, but like I had to get to a space where I would allow people in
Yeah.
to this experience and help me and open my heart to connect with them. And that was what I'd been missing for 10 years because I became
Yes.
so afraid of losing somebody else.
Yes.
Um, so that was healing me, even though it was in almost like a roundabout way. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't directly with my dad's death. It wasn't in a literal way. It was just, I'm going to let people help me and let them in a different thing. So I think that it really was the first step. And then once you get to a space where, okay, not only do I trust myself, I can figure things out if they get difficult. I believe in myself. Now you're learning to trust other people and believe in them, and you're spreading that energy so that they're able to do things they didn't know were possible because you're
Yes.
able to invest in other people better because you've invested in yourself first. And then I think that's when you get to a point where you're like, oh, there's something happening here that's so much bigger than me,
Yes.
like that I'm actually part of, and we're all part of. And my priority with my life is to do what I'm here to do and to contribute to that. It's not, what do I get? It's not like, how do I seem? How do I come across? Am I valuable? I'm valuable just because I was born.
Yes. 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 Say that again. It's like you're exactly right. Like we aren't really taught to trust ourselves or to focus on that. We aren't taught to trust other people. We're taught to be uh can I mean that's
It's
a
the American
pretty
way.
yeah, it's like you just really don't know how to take people what they say for face value or not. Is it, or am I being manipulated? Am I being misled? And I'm enough. I am valuable just because I was born is such a powerful statement. So simple, but so powerful because it has so much punch and so much meaning. And I, again, just keep going back to this idea that you had something that was so traumatic happen that you've been able to turn into this beautiful story of being about more than you. When most people, I shouldn't say most people, again, another generalized statement, but it would be difficult, I think, for a lot of people to do that instead of staying in that almost depressed state or victim mentality. You've shared with me just briefly in personal conversation that through your depression, and you started the episode here talking about the medications, but you shared with me also that you have been sober now for how many years?
8.
Congratulations.
Thank
We
you.
we also are in that 8 to 9 year period of time where we have been alcohol free, and I can't even begin to explain what that feels like to most people. The freedom and the trust that that in and of itself has built for us as individuals, and I'm sure you would agree with that. For me, it wasn't a conscious decision. It was just something that I was like, I'm not going to drink today, and then I'm not going to drink tomorrow. How did that look for you when you were off of your medications, and help me through that, timeline, but what did that look like for you in that decision?
Yeah, I mean, it was a medical thing for me. Like, I don't want to mislead any of your listeners into thinking like, oh, I was struggling with I was drinking,
Sure.
in a way that was unhealthy
Destructive.
for
Yeah.
me. Yeah, that's not what I was doing. What it became for me was that I think my metabolism changed at a certain age, and I had been on antidepressants since I guess the age of 17.
Mm-hmm.
And I was now on one that worked really well for me. Like I had finally, after that whole, my mom went through hell taking me to therapists, which I did write about in the book. And that was hard to write about. It wasn't nice to revisit that time, but I
Sure.
also knew that I needed to, because I needed my reader to understand the humanness, in my
Yeah,
father and in me,
absolutely.
and why I had some of the mistaken beliefs about myself that I had. Like I thought, because of doctors I'd seen when I was 19, that I needed to live a life that was limited and
Mhm.
didn't have too much stress in it. Like I needed to be basically I needed to be afraid of my depression, and I
Yeah,
needed
you're
to be
doing too
mad.
much. You're
Yeah, I
causing
needed
this
to
for
be
yourself.
managing triggers at all times.
Yeah.
And I don't know if kids are still being taught that, but it's not a real growth conducive attitude towards life
Sure.
when you're being taught, oh, you have an illness, you have to be afraid of yourself all the time.
Yeah.
And basically with alcohol, no one ever really said to me when I was about 21, like, hey, you probably are not someone who should be drinking.
Sure.
Like you have depression, and alcohol is a depressant, and that's not going to make you feel better.
It's not going to help. I mean,
Yeah,
that's not,
I mean, I
yeah,
was growing up at, a good school, but also a party school, and that was the culture. That's what everybody did. And
absolutely.
I wonder sometimes now, like all those, by the time I was on 9 different drugs at once, I was 23. So it's like, and I remember very clearly still going to parties and still like binge drinking with people, and like how is that helping you? Like there was some weird disconnect going on there. But as I went through my 20s and my early 30s, I still was a social drinker. And like I said, I think I just got to an age where my metabolism changed, and for some reason the way I was now processing the small dose of antidepressant I still took, it just started interfering whenever I would drink,
Mm-hmm.
which was not often, but sometimes when I would really notice it would be like we had gone to a wedding, and the next, like I had maybe 4 drinks that night, and the next day I would be very irritable.
Mm-hmm.
And it was almost like I was in withdrawal from my medication, and I was really a bear to be around. Would just start fights about nothing for no reason. And after this had happened enough times, my husband was like, okay, enough, because he was on the receiving end of it mostly. And I'm
Right.
sure there was an element there too of this grief that I had that was unresolved for me.
Mhm.
And oh, we had just gone to a wedding,
Mhm.
so I'm seeing someone else move forward in their lives in a way that I would like to be doing, and I'm frustrated by. So eventually he just said, look, either the medicine goes or the drinking goes. It has to
Yeah.
be one or the other. We can't keep doing this. And I felt like, well, I don't want to go back to that space where I'm 23 and can't find the right drug. This works.
Right.
So how about the drinking goes? So it really was like almost this happy accident in a way that here I was at 35 and I'm making this choice. I'm just never going to drink alcohol again. But it opened up my life to this level of joy that I couldn't recall experiencing since I was 20,
Yeah.
since I was in college. I mean, immediately I signed up for an art, like a figure painting class. And I had been an art major before I switched to journalism. And I would go to this class every Friday night after work. And I wasn't doing happy hour anymore. I didn't have any motivation to go to a bar and drink with anyone. I'm just going to my class and I'm going to do my figure painting.
Mhm.
And it was amazing how much happier I got all of a sudden.
Yes.
And this isn't even something that like I ended up getting the degree in. And like it isn't necessarily on my career path anymore. It's just a part of me I left behind that's
Yes.
really important to who I am. And now I have the room, I have the time, I have the space and energy to actually do it. And I really think now that that was like an important ingredient for when we found the list and I started doing it a few years later, or when I became a runner, because that's another part of why I became a runner, because now I have all this free time that I
Yes.
didn't have when I was like, okay, work hard, play hard, that's my life.
Yep.
It doesn't have to be like anyone who's listening right now who's in your early 30s, like your life does not have to be work hard, play hard. Like I think it was the New York Times. I read an article the other day that was saying that millennials don't know what hobbies are or something. Like they've been so conditioned by society and maybe their parents to achieve, and they get to a space in their lives where okay, I have the job and I'm successful. And now when I'm with my friends, maybe they're drinking, who knows what they're doing, but it's like that same work hard, play hard mentality. And the concept of doing anything outside of that is it's so foreign that they don't even know what they like.
Yes. Again, very relatable. And I feel like I found myself there 10 years ago, since you bring that to the surface, where like it was everything was about the finish line back then. I said earlier, it's no longer about the finish line, it's about the process. I just know who I am in a way that I didn't then. And so everything was around what can I do to accomplish things? What can I do to be this? And now it's like, I'm just me. And these are the things that I love doing. And I'm just trying to do them all while I'm able and while I have time. And it's a completely different mindset. And I really appreciate you sharing that piece of you, that personal part of this sobriety journey, because I think it's really important what you said. Like you, you weren't an alcoholic. You weren't engaging in destructive over drinking, binge drinking behavior. You just realized like I've outgrown alcohol. It doesn't serve me in the way that, maybe it did when I was 20 and I was focused on that part of my life. And it's not from a space of judgment. It's really just from a place of awareness. So the fact that you shared that, I think, is a really important message around this conversation of sobriety, is that it wasn't because you were broken. It wasn't because you had a horrible habit or an illness or a dependency on alcohol. It was a conscious choice of, I'm a better version of me without it. And however that began for you with the medication is only because you were open to being aware of that conscious choice, and having a supportive spouse to be there for you and be like, hey, something's got to give here. And I think we need to have this conversation is such an integral part of that as well. So thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that. I don't
Yeah.
think
Well,
that gets talked about enough.
I think my body decided before
Yeah.
my soul did. And I view it as like, what an awesome thing that my body decided that, because my life is improved tenfold that now
Yes.
that alcohol isn't part of it. I mean, that's in no way me saying to people who enjoy a casual drink once in a while, like, oh, that's wrong, or
Yeah.
you're
Right.
missing out on having a great life by doing that. There's nothing wrong with doing that. I'm just saying that for me, this was the path I needed to take. I needed to not ever drink again, because my depression and what I was about to do with my life didn't have room for it. And I think it also almost was the first step towards my new version of activism. Because when I first was learning how to be a safe driving activist, I was just sort of copying what I saw other people doing, which was tell people about what happened to your loved one, tell them why they shouldn't be doing this, and then give some education about it, about what it does to your brain, et cetera, et cetera. And that never really felt like a good fit for me, because I don't tend to make changes to my life because someone is scaring me about it and telling me, oh, don't do this, this, and this, or here's this horrible thing that's going to happen.
Sure.
What tends to affect me personally is if I see someone living a life where they seem happy, and I think, well, what's their secret? I want to be more like that. They must be doing something. And if they're doing something that's very different from what I'm doing, then I might be inclined to try to adopt some of those habits. It's more of like an inspirational way of change. And, I think a very early step of that for me was making the choice to do something that might have me in social situations where people are questioning what I'm doing. Like, oh, why aren't you drinking? It's like, well, why are you? Why is it something I have to explain that makes me different? And halfway through doing the list, I actually changed my diet completely. And my husband had been vegan for 8 years, and I would eat that way when I was at home because he's an incredible cook and he was cooking for us, but not when I was outside of the house. And I made the shift to do it all of the time. And one thing I recognized was, oh, well, I could give up alcohol, so I can do this too. And it made me feel better. It made me feel healthier. The last thing that was preventing me from doing it was my running, because I was afraid, I bought into this myth that you need to have protein from animals to be strong. And that's actually not true. So once I started noticing, oh, I feel so much better, this is the right path for me, I also started recognizing, oh, people get really weirded out when I talk about being vegan.
Yeah, right.
It's not that different from when I gave up alcohol. And it was helping me to understand, okay, I can be the change. I can be that person who people are looking to and seeing, oh, your life seems a lot better. You seem a lot happier. Maybe I'll make that change too. And that could also apply to safe driving. That could be a thing where people would see, oh, you traveled to 15 different travel destinations in 6 years for this bucket list, and not once did you use your phone while driving. How is that possible? Because it's we're so cultured now that that's just okay. That's what we do. It maybe surreptitiously, but I think people are still doing it. It is actually possible to live your life where you're going to insist that you stop, that you park your car before you take a phone call. It is possible to go to a rest stop and make that choice. It's going to maybe take a few extra minutes, but it's okay, because you're just keeping that commitment to yourself. This is what I value.
I think that's such a great way to connect all of that. Just this conscious decision that I get to choose. And if I know that there's a better way, even if it's against the grain, even if it's not something that anyone else understands, it's my own personal decision for me to show up for myself in the best way possible. And so just the way that you articulated that, connecting all of those things, from drinking to veganism to not driving with your cell phone in your hand, or not being distracted while driving, is such a huge, overarching, wonderful message to connect to. And it's so relatable. And I want to circle back to the book and to the list, because you said something that I think we brushed over, but you said that kind of not drinking freed up time before you knew it, before you found the list. And that kind of prepared you, again, kind of back to that readiness moment of okay, now you found the list, and now you found yourself sober and having free time to be able to put your best foot forward to tackle some of these adventures or challenges. And without knowing what's the reason for this, other than the reason that I've been able to isolate in my decision-making process, it opened up this big expanded world and this expanded idea that you were able to connect to that too. And I am also a potential junkie, and I am addicted to the idea that, like, if someone's living a better way or a happier life, I want some of that. Like, what are you doing then? I need to know all of this. And so when you found the list and you found yourself with this time, I'm sure that made your decision much easier to be like, oh, I can totally do this. I can totally tackle this in the way that I want and use it for this greater purpose and mission and my activism that has now become so much bigger.
I had already devoted myself to something bigger than me. I had
Mm-hmm.
already been an activist for a couple of years. I had already stepped outside of my comfort zone to do that. Been willing to write about my experience in big national places, been willing to meet other people and other families who had experienced the same kind of thing. A lot of the time they were parents and it
Mm-hmm.
was their children.
Mm-hmm.
And so once I started having that experience where I was in a position where I was meeting them, I really just, that's when it was becoming clear to me, like, oh, there's a reason that I'm a writer and this happened in my family.
Mm.
Like I have connections they don't have. I can lift their voice up. Like there's a reason
Yes.
why I switched from fine arts to journalism when I was in college. And what really appealed to me about it was that I wanted to be a voice for the voiceless. I mean, at that time in my life, it was about depression and it was about wanting to write about mental health and
Mm-hmm.
removing stigma from it. But now it could be about safe driving. And, I don't know how different those causes are. I
Really?
really
Right.
don't, because I think we're living in this weird time right now in our society where so many of us are sort of on autopilot,
Mm-hmm.
like we're sort of half asleep, and it's not some weird like it's not like a spiritual deficit that exists inside of people. It's just the freaking phones, it's just we're connected all the time, but connected not in a real way. It's like a slot machine sometimes, right? Because it's like there's the promise of connection in this thing that we all have, that we all have to check, but
Yeah.
it doesn't always work out. Like sometimes you lose all your money.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
You
Great.
don't hit the
Great.
jackpot every time. And the truth is, we're not meant to be objects, and we're not meant to be slaves to anything. We're meant to live our own individual lives. And my dad knew that in 1978. And I think there was just something about me going through this list and being like, okay, visit New Orleans, or, like, oh, what do I think he wanted to do there? He probably wanted to go to Jazz Fest, visit San Diego. What would he have wanted to do there? Oh, probably he would have checked off go sailing by myself. Like I'm doing on this list the dreams of a man who lived in a much simpler time
Yes.
and a much more
Yes.
innocent time, and pursuing things that don't require a phone. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm like breaking out of a mold by doing that. And you're right. Like the fact that I had given up drinking completely, the fact that I had become a marathon runner, and now I was also an activist. I'm already taking steps toward doing things that are part of a unique life path, and
Mm-hmm.
deciding I don't care so much, that I'm not fitting into that mold anymore.
You were connecting so deeply with yourself, and in
Yeah.
that way also connecting to your father in a way that maybe you didn't anticipate. I'm not sure. I don't want to speak for you, but it sounds a lot like, as you're discovering these things about yourself, you're really connecting with him in a way of like, what would he want to do here? And that, I think that's so interesting that
It
you,
affected how I saw sexism too, in a big
huh?
way. I was always, like you said, I was always in this mindset of what would he want to do here? And that meant I'm now almost like letting this 1978 man, 29-year-old man's mentality live behind my eyes. And I'm now seeing my exchanges with people as a 40-year-old woman at that time totally differently.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, why can't I pose in a tuxedo? Like one of the list items was own a black tux. Like I'm gonna do it my way. There's nothing weird about that. And like that's the only one that comes to my mind right now that was definitively masculine. But it
Sure.
definitely did open my eyes to, well, why do we dress the way we do? And like what does that even mean? And by the end of the list, not to like spoil the story, but by the end of the list, I was training for triathlons because I had checked off swim the width of a river, and I had checked off run 10 miles straight. And I ended up actually during the list riding like in this bicycle race through the desert in Arizona for like 56 miles. So I thought, well, that's basically half an Ironman. Like I just have to do it all one day. And
Yeah.
then I just started training for all of those things during the pandemic because I suddenly had so much extra time.
Mhm.
And I started raising money for Girls on the Run, which was an organization I really believed in and still believe in. And I still have that as my goal. I've done 2 half Ironman races now. I haven't finished one yet because something happens every time.
Sure.
But I'm going to finish one. And, would I be doing something called an Ironman if I hadn't done this first, if I hadn't pursued the ideas that this man had in 1978? One thing I started recognizing halfway through doing the list, because that was when I actually got laid off from my job that I had had for 7 years. And in normal times, I would have been devastated by that. I would have been like, oh my God, because that was my identity. Like
Yes.
when you work for a magazine and you're in like a production position like I was, you have to stay there till like 10 o'clock, sometimes midnight, several times a month. It was cutting into my actual life outside of
Mhm.
work, but I didn't care because I was so passionate about it.
Yeah.
And it was who I was. And if that had happened without doing the list project at the same time, I would have probably sunk into a deep depression because it would just be like I lost who I am. But because I had just found the list and I had been doing it for a year and I now had an agent and I was writing a book about it, instead I was really happy
Mhm.
because now I had been freed from something.
Yes.
And I had time to finally actually write the book now because our schedule had really picked up that winter. And I was supposed to be writing my first 100 pages and I had gotten none of them done because
Mhm.
that was taking priority. I had enough years of doing this that I could get freelance work and I could still make ends meet the same, like I could still make the same amount as I was before. But I would never have taken that leap to do that because it would have meant, even though I needed to, but it would have meant leaving this part of me behind that I thought I was. So
Yes.
what actually started happening a lot of the time with the list was I was gradually letting go of and losing so many things, just so many things I clung to that I didn't need. And
Yes.
and every time it would happen, I would just my first thoughts would be, oh my God, I'm becoming this like crazy dreamer like my dad was, and this life I've built is now falling apart. And I'm just gonna lose everything. Like
Like
I
you're
can't
throwing it all away. You can't.
all away.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know who I am anymore because I'm a copier of good housekeeping. Like I would tell people that with so much pride all the time. And eventually what I started realizing was, no, I'm not those things. Like those are things I was doing, but
Mhm.
they're not who I am.
Right.
And I think it's like people don't want to do that. Like they don't want to risk letting go of things they've built
Oh yeah.
to find
It's too
anything new.
scary.
But you have to though. Like even some relationships I had, like just certain things I clung to because they represented a certain thing to me.
Mhm.
I had to be willing to just say, okay, just whatever, take it, whatever I have to let go of. It's almost like, so let's say the mission of doing the list is like you're hiking, right? And sometimes your pack gets too heavy and you
Right.
have to just leave something behind because it's either leave it behind or never get to the destination.
Right.
And that's sort of what it started becoming for me. And I think that really is when in my subtitle of the book, How Living My Dad's Dream Set Me Free, I really think that's what that's about. Is not only did I have actual trappings of my life that weren't really right for me anymore, I also had beliefs that were never right.
Oh yeah.
I had ideas about who I was and what I could accomplish and what I could do that were incorrect. I mean, I had this concept that I had to be afraid of myself because I had depression. I had this self-concept that I was a gentle, shy, reserved person because that was sort of what I was conditioned as growing up. And yeah, I do like to be a kind person, but I'm also, it turns out, pretty good at public speaking. And my voice when I write is one of the best parts of me. So
Mhm.
I feel like it would be such a shame if I kept living that way and hiding my voice because I thought that wasn't who I was supposed to be.
Because someone somewhere along the line at some stage of your life said something that felt that way, or maybe said it directly, and you held on to that. And in this moment and in this way, you were letting go of those things. And it was so liberating, scary, probably. It's always scary to make change. But in my experience, I found that when I'm willing to be open to what happens when I make that change, I feel free, like you said in your subtitle, and so liberated and so much more confident in myself. And it's almost like the snowball that's like picking up snow and rolling down the hill and becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. Um, if you're able to be brave enough and courageous enough to kind of trust that instinct and trust the signs and take the steps necessary to do it.
Well, I think it's that collaboration that I was talking about. I mean, we're not here alone. There's something
Yeah.
else helping us and guiding us. And like you said, you can find it all around you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you believe that, you're going to find it. And also you have to understand that there's this inner compass that is also always showing you where to go. And that when you make choices that are guided by that, it feels different.
Yes.
So you have to
100%.
go by that feeling. I mean, how many choices do we make in our lives, not really knowing a whole lot about whatever it is we're about to do, but purely because this feels right,
Mm-hmm.
and those always end up being the right thing.
Yeah.
Like there's a reason for that.
It's when we're resistant that we often make a bad, that not bad, like from a judgmental standpoint, but like a choice that doesn't end up panning out the way we hope.
Yeah, it's a heart versus head thing.
Yeah.
At some point I started seeing hearts every day. And I started connecting that with this idea that uh, as long as I was making choices that felt right for my heart, I was headed in the right direction. And
Yes.
that my dad was going to send me these hearts to let me know. So I might have just made a choice that was really out of character for me and that was really scary and that made me like worry about what was going to happen. But if I saw that heart, I would think, oh no, this was list me. Like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And it was a very different way to live because, I used to be the same way. I was very in my head and very like, okay, well, if I can't figure this out right now, like how I think this is going to go, then I probably shouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
But, as I'm sure you've discovered too, like some of the best things we do in our lives, we don't have all the information when we
Yeah.
start.
Or this preconceived idea of what it's supposed to look like, or the limitations that we've been hanging on to that we picked up somewhere along the way. I am curious about the list. Maybe I just haven't gotten there yet, but did you tackle these in order, or did you just pick them as you saw fit into what was happening in your life? Of
Yeah, I first I did the running one because I was already signed up for the marathon, and then I also did the get my picture in a national magazine. That was early because I was working for one, and they wanted to publish an article that I wrote about doing the list. And then we were going to go to New Mexico for our 1 year wedding anniversary. So I thought, oh, well, that's a perfect place to check off ride a horse fast. So
oh
at
yeah.
first, it was like things were coming together very organically. And then I started recognizing, okay, like I had given myself a 4 year deadline because the first list item said he hoped to live until the year 2020. So that helped me to organize it better. And then I started thinking, okay, I have to figure out where are we most likely to travel? And I'm thinking about the finances too, of course. So I'm having to like space things out to make sure I can afford all of it.
Sure.
So yeah, I guess about the end of year one, I got out my Google Calendar and I just I just started mapping things out and figuring out where does it make sense for me to do skydiving. Well, no, I had actually already done that at that point, but like where does it make sense for me to do sailing? Where does it make sense for me to go to the Super Bowl? Okay, we'll probably do that near the end because that's going to be expensive. It was stuff like that, and I still sort of live that way. Like sometimes I'll plan something with someone and we don't have it set in stone yet, but I'll still put it on the calendar for when I think it's going to happen
Mm-hmm.
because I'm living in such a future oriented way all the time of, I don't ever think like, oh, well, this probably won't happen. Like that's not part of my vocabulary anymore. It's
Right.
we'll figure it out.
Yes, 100%. I always say I sign up for things and then I figure out how to do them when I like already know I'm going to do them. Sometimes I put things on the calendar that I haven't had confirmation of, or that I'm not sure are going to happen, but I am sure they're going to happen, or at least I'm going
Yep.
to plan that they are. And that's how that works. So I think that's really cool that you kind of again, we're just so open to what was happening and where does this make the most sense, and allowing it to flow versus forcing it. Did you find that there were any items on the list that your dad did cross off before?
Yeah, he
Yeah.
checked off five.
Okay.
So he checked off go to a World Series game, much to my husband's disappointment because he's a big baseball fan. He checked off have an impressive record collection. My dad was a singer and just really passionate about music, so that made sense to me. And I have half of it now. He checked off be interviewed on the radio, help my parents enjoy their retirement,
Oh,
and do a comedy monologue.
very cool.
And then the one he marked as having failed was pay my dad back $1,000 plus interest.
Oh, oh,
Yeah. So, I mean, the list items, as much as they were opening me up to the possibilities of who I was supposed to be and what I could do and a new way of living, right? Because that's sort of what I've developed here. They also were helping me to understand my dad better as a young man. I mean, because he wrote this before he was even a father, or he had just become a father. So I'm getting to meet him at that
yes.
stage in his life and understand that person better. And, I think that's why as I proceeded through the list and I'm making this conscious choice to honor this person I love all the time who taught me so many things, I'm now able to let go of any lingering resentments I had with him and forgive him for things. And it was so crucial that I did that, because if I couldn't do that, then I think probably the trauma reaction I had to his death, like that was just going to be in me forever. Like I would remain this scared person
Sure.
of living on the edge, or or doing things outside of the box, because what if it happened to me too?
Right. What I hear woven throughout this entire conversation is that it's bigger than you. There's something bigger guiding you if you're open to it. And that being open to it is crucial for being able to step outside of your comfort zone and really trust yourself and try new things and learn things about yourself that you didn't know, and let go of things that you thought you knew, and live life to its fullest and the most potential that you have based on you and what's important to you. And that this list really, the story is so beautiful and it has such a great mission and your activism tied to it, but that really this list was just something that lifted the veil for you and said, hey, you were already doing some of these things, but now being able to like really feel them, and back to that purpose conversation, like connecting that to you in a very deep way.
And I mean, it certainly affected my marriage too,
Oh yeah.
because I was afraid he would leave. I was afraid if I did something so personal and so unique to my own life path, like, is that okay? Like, am I
That
not
make him
being
feel dismissed, or would that make him
right?
feel, yeah.
Yeah, I'm supposed to be, I had just gotten married,
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be learning how to be part of a team and us doing things together. Instead, the complete opposite happened. Instead, it was him saying to me, oh, this is who you always were, who the person I love deep down, who was covered in all of this stuff, all of this
Mm-hmm.
trauma and fear and hangups. And now you have finally gotten rid of it so that you can really live. So this is actually who I've been waiting for this whole time.
Oh, we talk a lot about a supportive spouse, so I'm so glad that you brought that up. Almost every guest we discuss this, and the way that you just said that, and the way that he shared with you that he's been waiting for you to show up, is so touching and meaningful. I just, that's probably that's beyond how does he support you?
When we tell ourselves as women, and I do think women do this a lot more than men, we're conditioned to do it. When we tell ourselves, I need to be this, I need to be a great mom, I need to be a great wife, I need to be a great daughter, all of these things that we prioritize ahead of our own happiness.
Right.
Who are we really? We're not supposed to be servants to everyone. We need to be aware of who we are uniquely on our life path, because that's part of that relationship. That's part of why our partners with us. They want us to find joy. They want us to find happiness.
Right. Yep. They want to help us find the best version of ourselves by being the support. Greg and I just had this conversation literally right before we got on this call. He's like, it isn't my job to tell you what to do or how to do it. It's my job to help you figure out what works best for you and be supportive of that and throw ideas your way, and you bounce ideas off of me. And so I think you're exactly right. We get caught up in this is what I'm supposed to be, and forget all about ourselves. And it isn't selfish of me to have things that I pursue as a woman. And this is just so in alignment with your story. Like, there's a difference between being selfish and self-interested. Self-interested for me means that I like to be physically active and I like to do really challenging things with that. And that takes time, and that might appear selfish to some, but it's actually filling my cup first so that I'm able to show up for everybody else in the best way possible. And I think that I'm the one that had the problem with that. I think I'm the one that held myself to the fact mostly that, like, this is selfish of me because of something somebody said somewhere along the line, and it impacted me. And then having that realization that, like, this isn't selfish. This is absolutely 100% how I should be living my life, and the example that I want to set for anyone and everyone, especially my kids and my husband and our nuclear family here, about how to determine what's important. So I love that you brought that back up with the conversation around your husband being such a supporter of you, and that impacted your relationship, but in the best way instead of in the way that you anticipated.
Yeah, I mean, the cover of my book, I'll never forget this. There's a picture of me on the cover, and I'm on the top of Eagle Rock in Los Angeles. And there was a bench right behind me. And this picture was taken like 11 days before we found the list. There was a bench right behind me, and it said it was dedicated to someone who had passed away. And it said that old parable. It was like, don't walk behind me, I may not lead. Don't walk in front of me, I may not follow. Just walk beside me and be my friend. And I had just gotten married, and I remember seeing that bench and thinking, oh, that's the way my dad would see things.
Yeah.
That's weird. Why is that there? Like the top of this cliff, there's this weird bench here that says this. But yeah, the more we talk about this, the more I feel like that's always what the list was teaching me how to do. How to understand that my husband and I had just joined each other's lives together, but it was not for security. And it was not so that one of us could be made to feel more valuable. Like, it was not for validation. It was because we're choosing to be friends. We're choosing to help guide each other and be there when we fall, and when you have that in your life, when you have a love like that, and that's not to say people have to be in relationships, you can be in a wonderful relationship with yourself and have that sense of trust and faith. But when you have that, you can do anything.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I feel like that's been the general consensus of all of our guests, is that they feel that way too. In that notion of, like, the supportive spouse is not giving me permission. They're just being kind of my partner in my belief system, that I literally can do anything. And their belief is almost enough to help me make the step and take the action forward into doing that. Thank you for sharing that too, and bringing that up, because we almost brushed over it, and I would have been upset that I missed that, because it's such an important piece. And you've spoken about him this entire time and how encouraging he was, and how much of a good sport, if that's the word that you would use, like how he was, like, totally into doing these things with you, and telling you, like, I've been waiting for you to get here to this version of yourself. That's amazing.
That's not in any way saying to your listeners, like, oh, if you're not in, if you
Oh,
don't
no.
words. Yeah, it's more, that was what I needed on my path.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that everything is everyone's individual experience, and whether it's applicable to your life or not, it isn't from a space of judgment. I always feel that way when I talk about not drinking, because I don't want anyone who does drink to feel like I think that it's horrible and you're a bad person. And we have alcohol in our house because people come over and they do drink, and they drink and they leave it behind because they fly home the next day or whatever. And it's like, there's no judgment about the situation with alcohol or with being with a spouse or whatever. It's literally unique to your being and your experience as a human. I feel like if everyone was more accepting of just that one topic that we could probably riff on all day long, we would be so much more evolved as a species and as a society. This idea that, like, let's stop judging and just be open to the idea that, like, people are inherently good and have an experience all of their own, that they are doing the best that they can every day with what they have and what they know. Like,
Yeah, and
leave it there.
as long as you continue to do things just because they're the right thing for you, I think you're going to be okay. I mean, and it never ends. I mean, like, we don't have children, and sometimes I feel like, oh, people are making an assessment of me because I don't have them, and the reality is that I'm great with kids and I love kids. So it's like, just because we come up with these ideas about who people are because they're not doing the norm, it doesn't mean that they're actually accurate.
Right. I feel very connected to you. I have been honored to follow your journey. It's been a privilege to see how this has come together, and I can't wait to finish the book, because everything that I've read so much is like page turner, like can't put it down. And then I do eventually put it down, and then I get, bogged down with all of the
Yeah,
million other things, like
with
everybody
life.
else in life, right? Like
Well, it should
kids and life.
feel like an escape when you read it anyway.
And it does. And it's so well written and so beautifully
Thank you.
articulated. And now that I have had the opportunity to speak with you today, or we have before Greg had to bolt out of here, I feel like I connect to it so much more, because it's again, I just haven't finished yet, but like there's just so much depth to the whole lesson and the whole story and the whole mission that I just maybe hadn't gotten to, or wasn't aware of yet. So thank you so much for sharing
Yeah.
your story, and also like some of the other things that we talked about today. I really appreciate it, and I really value your time and all of your knowledge and all of your mindset that you've shared. So thank you.
Thank you. And as far as the activism goes, I don't even think of myself really as an activist that way anymore. Because at some point you'll see this in the story, at some point it shifted for me from helping people with how they drove to helping people with how they live.
Oh, yes.
Like, it became something else for me. And
Just
that
again,
is how I
something
feel now.
like almost, I don't want to use the word bigger and be misconstrued, but like just this almost higher, more robust version of not one topic, but
Mhm.
all of it. Yeah, that's great. Where can we find more about you, and how can we support you? How can we support the mission that you're on to spread awareness around that activism piece? Where can we find you?
I am on bylauracarney.com. That's my website. If you want to go there, and you can see all my clips on there. You can buy the book there and just learn more about what I've been doing. And I'm also my father's list on Instagram.
I will link all of those in the show notes.
Thank you. I have some
And
exciting stuff coming up soon, so
are you able to
stay
share?
tuned.
Or
No,
is
not
this
yet.
okay? But so we have to go follow and stay tuned for more in that
Yeah.
way then. Okay. Well, I again very much appreciate your time. I appreciate you sharing, and I'm so happy that we were able to like meet in this way, face to face, after I feel like I've known you all for the last
Oh,
couple of years
me
watching
too.
everything. So thank you.
Thank you.